Yes, so Camila Piñeiro Harnecker, welcome. Camila is going to be talking about Cuban cooperatives and their governance, and we're looking forward to hearing what's happening. So an update. Thank you, Camila.
Yes, so it's not an update, Sonja, that wasn't the plan, but I can provide some more like current information in the Q&A. But yeah, in very short time to talk about, basically this was a study of 6 case studies, 6 different types of cooperative. I'll explain why I chose these 6. I'm going to start with a quick overview and then share some key results and some generalizations based on work that I've done in the past with Cuban co-ops. So a quick overview of co-ops in Cuba. Very few existed before 1959. They were part of the revolutionary program that led the revolution and the generation that led the revolution. Agricultural cooperatives were created as one of the first measures taken by the revolution, which were 2 agrarian law reforms in 1959 and 1961. And the idea was that some associations that already existed to be converted into cooperatives so they could have access to services and commercialization and all the power of larger scale. Different types of agricultural cooperatives have been expanded in several waves. The first one, as I mentioned, the typical agricultural producer cooperatives that you have around the world. And then later, the more collective worker cooperatives in agriculture, and UVPCs are conversions from state farms. I'll talk a bit more later. And then since the new reform process that started around 2008, but really 2011 for co-ops, they were recognized as a key component of the Cuban new economic model, for the first time explicitly recognizing their autonomy, but also their social orientation. And something also is that, as you could see before, all the cooperatives were in agriculture, and then in 2012 it was allowed to create cooperatives outside agriculture, so industry and services. And there were only 498 that were authorized of many, hundreds of proposals. So that's why we only have 430 around that are working now. But what we hope is going to happen soon, but we keep hoping since 2015. So hopefully in the next year or so, we'll have finally a general law, and then I'm sure we'll see many more worker cooperatives and producer cooperatives outside of agriculture being created. And so just a quick overview, the first one that I mentioned, there are more, near 2,500. The second one near 900, which are the collective worker cooperatives in agriculture. UVPC, the conversions in agriculture are around 1,500, and the non-agropecuarias, the new mostly worker cooperatives in urban areas, are around 421 as of March. And so for the size of our country of near 11 million, this is a lot of cooperatives. And although it's an important percentage of the labor force, and most importantly in agriculture, they produce between 80 and 90% of all the agricultural output. So just very quickly, these are the 4 types that I've mentioned. And as I said very quickly, trade and service cooperatives are producer, like the regular agricultural producer cooperative that exists in the world. The difference here is that administrative staff are members. And agricultural production cooperatives are, as I mentioned, worker cooperatives in agriculture. These are people who decided to sell their land to the cooperative, no? And so now the land is owned collectively and they work collectively. And the basic unit of cooperative productions, as I mentioned, are conversions from state farms. So they were subdivided. And so the group of workers who used to work in a certain area from one day to the next, as they say, very quickly, it was in the middle of the crisis that happened after the fall of the Soviet bloc, and the US measures against Cuba also were strengthened. So it was a very critical, economic crisis for Cuba. So with very little preparation, these farms were converted into worker cooperative with many problems. But the good thing is that lessons were learned. Land is in free usufruct, and the equipment is collectively owned. And then the new types of cooperatives that have been created are these so-called non-agricultural, and the legislation allows for both worker and producer cooperative, but mostly they are worker cooperatives. Although I'll show in one of the case studies that there is a tricky line, no? And so these new non-agricultural cooperative, around 70% are conversions from state businesses, and the other ones are out of people's initiative. And they own or lease the buildings, and the main means of production are collectively owned. So these are the 6 cooperatives. One, you know what CC is? So this one started in 1979. The CPA is from 1983. The UBPC is from 1998. The first urban cooperative here is a conversion in textile industry, born in 2013. One is one that came out of their own initiative, but out of a state. It's kind of like in the middle of a conversion and like their own private initiative, because it was their initiative, but out of a group of workers who were part of a state enterprise in construction. And the last one is a group of accountants who decided to create a cooperative. So it's out of their own initiative. So just very quickly, you can see that the membership size varies. And you can see that also governing bodies vary, no? Of course, General Assembly, they all have board of directors, but some have and some do not have management councils. I don't know if that's the management council. And then supervisory bodies, as it was discussed in the last presentation, or in the last panel, some are like officially, in the case of the new worker or urban cooperatives, is outside. This is established in the legislation, no? But we can talk more about how these are organized. But they are always members who don't have an administrative responsibility, no, either in the board or in the management council. And something that is, I think, different from other countries is the frequency of the general assemblies. In the agricultural ones is monthly, and in the urban ones are they started with monthly, and they have moved to quarterly. And there, something also to highlight is the existence of other spaces for participation. So in addition to the General Assemblies, there are always other spaces that prepare for the General Assembly. So the idea is to go to a General Assembly with a consensus, in many cases, not in all the cases that I studied, to get to the General Assembly with a consensus of what are the best measures to be taken, no? And what they always told me, we don't, like the presidents or managers that I interview, they say, we don't take any decisions, we propose the decisions and the General Assembly takes the decision. So a difference from other consumer cooperatives and cooperatives in other countries, the board of directors doesn't make any real decision that has not been approved or has been established in a policy by the General Assembly. And so co-op education, yeah, this is something that I think is weak in the Cuban legal framework and also within the cooperatives, although some do like appreciate the importance, and so some have created education committees. But what is important is to see that in the new cooperatives, in urbans, they talk about education as being something that happens all the time in the general assemblies and in their everyday work interaction. Another thing to point here is that the producer cooperative, which are the first one and the last one, in addition to these bodies, they establish organizers or coordinators. Could be similar to what Sonja mentioned about the OAS committees. And so these are ways of reaching to members, no? Because in producer cooperative, people don't work together, no? So it's harder to communicate and to interact. So in this cooperative, they have this role that they say is like the life, the lifeblood of the cooperative. And this they allow for communication between members and governance bodies, no? These organizers or coordinators. And so, so as I mentioned, the general assemblies are frequent, no, relative to other cooperatives worldwide. They have these other spaces, and what is important is that these are smaller spaces for participation, generally work teams, and they serve different purposes in different cooperatives. The board of directors, something might be different from other countries, is that they generally include key management people, no, and also members from the key areas or departments, no, of the cooperative people. And so also in most cooperatives, at least this one that I studied, there is always, they tend to invite the union. So this is, I know it's a large question about the co-ops and unions, but, and also there are questions about the independence of unions in Cuba, but that's another question too. But the union representative, or in the case of the agricultural producers, there is a national association, and in some cooperatives, not in all, that in some cooperatives also, like the party and the women organization have like a position just to participate in the board meetings, but only to listen, no, as a way of engaging them. And something also that I think is different is the management council. Presidents participate, so it's like there is no clear division, as you say, between the president and the manager. And yeah, and the role of and managers are generally members of the cooperative. And the role that I mentioned about organizers or coordinators. So some aspects to finalize is about like from what I've studied in other cooperatives in Cuba. I think there are certainly practices of what is being called like humanist governance, and as I have already mentioned, that there is no clear division between management and other governance, at least the board of directors. Managers are members of the cooperative. They are elected. So the General Assembly elects the board of directors and also elects the manager. No, sometimes in some cooperatives, the board of directors can nominate the manager. Sometimes it's part of the General Assembly, like a commission for that, to do that. And yeah, and the role of the board is to supervise management, but all important decisions are made in the General Assembly. And as you have seen before, the frequency of the General Assemblies is high, and there are other spaces. The Supervisory Committee reports to the General Assembly in every General Assembly, and they have their role of kind of like more like continuous. They're always looking at issues that are of importance to the members. No, it's like they concentrate their control on specific issues that the members decide they want to focus on. And last, to finalize, the priority of labor over capital. No, something important to note is that in producer organizations, in the agricultural cooperative, when generally you have like the man who owns the land, who is the member of the cooperative, and not his woman, who might be the one who does a lot of the work in the farm. In Cuba, the wife of the farmer or the children, can, if they are old enough, they can be members of the cooperative if they work in the farm. And so limited hiring of permanent wage labor, that's by law. Institutional means to promote inclusion of wage workers. So there is a figure of test, I don't know how to translate, tiempo de prueba, like testing time for new members. And also it's established the work that retribution is according to work, no? That's very clear. And equality within and outside, equitable pay ratios, mandatory contribution to social security. So this is the cooperative looking outwards. And unlike other countries, cooperative pay taxes on net revenues, no? On universal provision of basic goods and services. So I just wanted to finalize, put my Cuban hat on, and to finalize saying that if you are interested in supporting Cuba, because it's a very difficult time now with the pandemic and all the measures that the Trump administration took against Cuba and the Biden administration has not undone yet. It's a very hard time in Cuba. So if you can inform yourself about things that you might be able to support Cuban cooperatives and the Cuban population. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Camila. Is this microphone working okay, Aaron? Yeah, all right, because we dropped it, so just checking. All right, drop the mic. Camila, thank you so much. It's always so fascinating to me to hear about Cuban cooperatives and how democracy works, and if you have general member meetings monthly or 3 months apart. So it's really just fascinating to me. So let's see what questions we have from people in the audience, and if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask. I think I saw, I'll read that one. Are all workers unionized? Is that what I saw? John asked.
And no, so in agriculture, the producer agricultural cooperative, it's voluntary, no? They belong to this association of small farmers, no? And in the UVPCs, basically, if for workers who used to work for the state, generally they at some point became members of unions, maybe just because that's what everyone was doing, and if you did not do that, it would be seen as incorrect. So workers who come from the state are generally already unionized, and then you continue to be member of the union. And in some cases, if there are enough, for example, in the cooperative of accountants that I studied, because there were enough, they have their own section, union I don't know how to translate it in English, their own like union section that is in the cooperative and gets to participate in the municipal union, no? So the role of the unions in Cuba and in this cooperative is not, that's why it's not so contradictory, because it's not for the workers to demand from the employer or the cooperative management, it's for the workers to demand from the state as much as they can, no? You know, it's not easy to demand from the state.
Thank you. Is the equitable pay ratio in the law was the question. I think you said that, did you?
And it was mandated recently for the urban or non-agricultural cooperative 1, 2, 3. But in practice, what I have seen, like in the agricultural cooperative, where there is no such mandate, and even before the mandate, this was like if it wasn't 1, 2, 3, it's 1 to 5, and generally those who are making the most, like earning the most, are not the president or the manager. These are like workers who are like really hard workers. So in many of the cooperatives I studied, yeah, it wasn't the president or the manager making the highest income.
Interesting. My question was about education, because you said that most of the agriculture co-ops don't have the education committee. Is it because of the role of an app in agricultural education?
Yeah.
Co-op education?
Well, the idea of the importance of cooperative education was only explicit in the legislation that was passed in 2019. So I think my interpretation is because in Cuba, education is universal from like pre-K to postgraduate studies. People think we don't need more education, but they don't understand that there is a different type of education when we're talking about cooperative education. No, it's about values, culture, etc., and like the democratic practices. So it has been recognized recently. And that's why I think that the agricultural cooperative, when you talk about, oh, what about the cooperative education committee, they are like, what? Like, they don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other points of clarification or questions, comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I've read this book that, well, I haven't read all of it. I've read some of it edited by you, Sonja, on Cuban cooperatives. In your presentation, Camila, you focus, it seems, more on the sort of the micro, the level of governance. What about the ecosystem level, the situation for founding new cooperatives, the culture of cooperatives in Cuba? I'm very much interested in this notion of convergence of systems, you know, from the whatever liberal capitalism to whatever it is that's in China and other places. Can cooperatives be a tool for a convergence in world systems, and what role can they play in the liberalization of the Cuban economy?
Yeah, that's a very long question, no? Like it requires a long response. But yeah, I think that for Cuba at least, and I think, but I'm gonna talk about Cuba. Conversions, well, it's a state policy. So, but I think it's a good path for Cuba. First, it's necessary. The state was over dimension. It's over, like it was handling too many economic activities that it haven't been handling. So, but in the case of Cuba, because state management was pretty horizontal, and there were spaces for participation, although they were formal. They could not elect management. Of course, they could not decide on what to do with the net revenues and how to invest or anything, the workers. But it was because the practice was not so like subordinate. I think workers in Cuba are very well prepared to manage a cooperative. No, also because of the culture, no, of equality and solidarity. People start from not like, okay, I know more than you, or, you know, like we start from a pretty like equal. So I think Cuba is very well set for conversions, no? And it's a state policy. It's just that it has been paused. And when the general law is passed, hopefully we'll see many more conversions happening, because that's what it has been decided. That's what is in the guidance documents for the current reform.